Good morning, friends. Happy Independence Day. Welcome to the 11th chapter of our journey of learning and growing together with Perspectives 2020. Our guest today is Mr. Nilesh Shah, MD and CEO of Envision Capital, ex-president Kotak AMC. Nilesh is one of the most soft-spoken money managers in the industry and is well regarded for his stock-picking skills. Prior to Envision, Nilesh was a part of Kotak Mutual Fund and was instrumental in setting up equity business of the group. Nilesh has picked many multi-baggers, of which some are Symphony, Tata Elxsi, 3M India, etc. Today, we will know some of the new stocks and sectors that he has eyes on. Welcome, Nilesh, sir. We are elated to host you today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Mansi. Thank you, Vikas. Thank you, Sandeep. Great to be here with all of you on such an auspicious day. It's India's Independence Day, and I'm feeling honored to kind of be a guest speaker on this 11th session of yours. And it coincides with the Independence Day, so there couldn't be any better day to kind of have this session. So great to be here, friends.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nilesh sir, for being a part of this session and, enlightening our investors today. And it is definitely a great day. It is India's Independence Day. And the Pradyushan Parv is also starting from today onwards. So it's a very auspicious day for we Jains and the entire Jain community. So through this platform, I would surely like to wish everyone a great Pradyushan and best wishes to everyone out here for Independence Day as well. We'll start our session, Nilesh sir, straight away with you. What I wish to understand from you today is that the headline these days are all about the huge disjunction between the rally in the market and the state of the economy. What is your take on this supposed normal? Does it happen all the time, or is this special happening this time around in this crisis?
Yeah, so I think that's I think a great way to start this session, and I'm quite sure that this is really on the top of the mind of everybody, be it every investor, every investment manager, policymaker, all of them put together. And the way I would look at it right now is that there is surely a disconnect between the way the markets are and the way the economy is. But I think within this dichotomy, there is in a way a bit of a paradox, which is in a way a good paradox to have. So I'd probably say that right now, the markets are getting driven by unprecedented liquidity. We've never seen this kind of liquidity getting pumped into the market. And there's a joke which goes on to say that if you invest into something, if it works well, you make a lot of money. If it doesn't work well, the US Fed will bail you out. Okay, and that's essentially what it is right now. That I think the kind of policy measures which the US Fed undertook between March and April essentially has not only just injected liquidity, but I think it has in a way given a lot of confidence to the market. It has boosted the sentiment quite significantly. And I think that at least for the foreseeable future, this liquidity is there to stay. On the other hand, in terms of the economy, yes, we've never seen this kind of a dip or in a way, so to say, a crash in the economy. But I think in a way, the markets have now at least become a lot more, I would say, mature, and they are willing to take a view that this kind of dip in the economy, whether it is we end 2020 as minus 5% GDP or minus 10% GDP, is anybody's guess. And finally, at the end of it, it's only a statistical number. But the reality is that this is something temporary, and another 6 or 12 months from now, we will surely get back into the normal mode of the economy. And so to that extent, whatever dip in the economy or the degrowth in corporate earnings, or some companies have been reporting loss for the quarter, June quarter, these at best should be looked at as exceptional, and temporary and exceptional. So to that extent, I think that somewhere the market is taking a view based on the liquidity that there is going to be a recovery a couple of quarters down the line. And therefore, that is the normalized scenario that one should look at post the calendar year 2020.
Right. Do you think the combination of zero interest rate, massive liquidity, and return of confidence in the economy is fueling this recovery?
Oh, totally. I think clearly, if you look at it, I think 3 months back, what was the biggest issue? That will companies survive? Okay. Will companies have the liquidity to basically come out of this situation? And so, to that extent, whether it's the US Fed, whether it is the government of India, whether it is the Reserve Bank of India, I think what they have done essentially is to first focus on basically survival, saying is that we must pass through this. And if you pass through this, if you are basically going to be surviving and you're going to be alive, you are going to then be growing and then thriving. Okay. So it's essentially what basically central banks world over and governments world over have focused is what they say as the bottom of the pyramid. So if you look at a pyramid, you first have at the bottom survival, then you have growth, and then you have thriving. And I think they're focused on that bottom part, which is survival. And so to that extent, my sense as of now still is that there is basically a strong liquidity which is providing a cushion to the markets. Number one. Number two, falling interest rates. Falling interest rates basically reduces cost of capital. And therefore, to that extent, at some point of time, companies will be encouraged to basically borrow at these historically low interest rates and invest back into the business and create a foundation for future growth. Third is basically the investors. And today, I'm quite sure a lot of investors are going to say, what am I going to get by putting my money in a bank fixed deposits, which are probably getting me that mid-single digit kind of a return, which is the 4, 5, 6%, depending upon what bank and what tenor it is. And post-tax, what am I left with? And post-inflation, probably I'm going to get negative rates of return, post-tax, post-inflation, versus that equity markets, the stock prices have fallen quite a lot and fallen significantly. It's fine if I have to wait for another 6 to 12 months. Once there is recovery, stock prices will normalize, and that will result into higher returns for me as an investor. So I think that this liquidity infusion and falling interest rates are not only good for the business, but I think in a way are triggering investors to start off getting more into a risk on mode, saying I don't mind kind of putting more or allocating more into equities. And that's why you're seeing that kind of money come into the market and drive up stock prices.
Now, I would have a follow-up on that, Nilesh, though you have touched upon it. Given that this loose monetary policy is likely to stay here for a foreseeable future, given the kind of destruction and the kind of problems that we have already seen because of COVID, would you advise investors to continue buying on dips or remain on sidelines because the valuations have definitely reached at a level now?
No, I clearly believe that this is a buy on dips market. Okay. Clearly, in the sense that I think one should not be looking at basically valuations now, but probably look at a scenario which is more like FY22, FY23. We all know FY21 is a washout. So trying to kind of value companies based on trailing 12 months earnings or even based on earnings for this current financial year may essentially kind of, you run the risk of being too conservative there. One will have to look at saying FY22 is going to be the first year of normalcy, and FY23 is essentially going to be the year of growth, and maybe some of the businesses will thrive. So one will have to right now, as it is, one should take a slightly more medium-term view on equities. So the way investors need to look at right now is that based on FY22, FY23, and maybe FY24, which means over the next 3 years, how will essentially the business of a company play out? How will earnings be? How are the valuations based on current prices? So I think when you do this, you will find that maybe stocks may look expensive based on their trailing earnings or their current year earnings, but will look reasonably attractive based on FY23, FY24 scenarios. So my view is that right now, kind of be a little more medium-term oriented and look at least a 2 to 3 year horizon to kind of have the earnings matrix.
Right. If you look at India, in many pockets, stocks have run quite ahead of the fundamentals. When do you expect to see a recovery in the earnings? And which sectors do you think will recover first, and which one are going to be the laggards?
Great. I think this is a very, very relevant question. If you ask me on a very aggregate basis, I think the earnings recovery will happen sometime in FY22, which means 1st April 21 to 31st March 22. That will be the first year of recovery. And then, of course, my sense is that that recovery will gain momentum in FY23, FY24. So I would probably think of FY22 as the year of recovery, FY23 as the year of growth, and maybe the year of FY24 where pretty much corporate India could be thriving. Okay, that's the way I would basically look at it going forward, with of course FY21 continuing to be the year of survival. In terms of sectors, I think what is going to happen for the next maybe year or so, it is going to be sectors like technology and pharmaceuticals, technology services and pharmaceuticals, which essentially are going to kind of deliver pretty reasonable to strong earnings. These are the two sectors where global demand is very strong. Some of our companies have developed competitive advantage, competitive edge, and they clearly offer a value proposition to their customers globally. And so to that extent, these two sectors, I expect them to be the most resilient sectors. The next set of sectors is going to be the consumer product companies, which are going to have stable. They are not going to witness high growth or terrific growth, but I think the consumer kind of sector companies will essentially have very, very stable set of earnings. And then post basically FY22, the 2 years after that, I expect a lot of sectors pertaining to the core economy to start to do well, which is essentially companies like cement companies, engineering companies, infrastructure-oriented companies. These are the kind of companies which probably will do well beyond FY22. So this is essentially the way I kind of really look at. So yes, I think FY22 is going to be the first year of overall earnings revival. But FY21, my sense is it is going to be technology and pharmaceuticals, which is going to be strong. Consumer will essentially provide you very stable set of earnings. And post FY22 and FY23 onwards, it is essentially the core sectors which will start to do well.
Got it. If I could take this forward, Nilesh, aviation, hotels, tourism, and whole lot of other service-oriented business are really struggling at the moment.
Yes.
What would be your views on them? I mean, are they going to take 2 to 3 years to come back to life? Or probably we must forget them now. These are sectors really going to take hell of a time to come back and completely should be avoided.
Clearly, this is going to be clearly a function of unlocking. That when does Pan-India get unlocked? When do we kind of unlock on a Pan-India basis? But I think the key to that is essentially, and I think broadly, if I look at India, 2 R's are very, very relevant. 1 R for remedy and the second R for reforms. Okay. And the sectors which you touched upon, which is travel, tourism, hospitality, hotels, all of these essentially are going to depend a lot on when do we see the first sure shot remedy for the coronavirus. Companies world over are working on evolving a vaccine, developing a vaccine. Of course, Russia has already announced 72 hours back that they have successfully basically invented the vaccine. But I think companies in the United States, in the United Kingdom, probably are confident of achieving it in the next 3 to 6 months. I think a couple of companies from India also are strong contenders for developing a vaccine. So what it looks like is that we probably will have a vaccine sometime during the course of 2021, sometime during the course of next calendar year. And I think once you see that coming in, is when people will begin to feel more comfortable to start traveling, to meet people one-on-one. You will again see people holidaying, conferences being hosted by businesses and all of that. And when that happens, will you see the travel, hotel, hospitality, tourism related sectors start to kind of pick up. So I would probably give it another 3 to 4 quarters for these companies to start demonstrating, or for all of us to see that first sign of revival for these sectors. So I clearly believe that the answer to that question of yours depends solely on when the vaccine for the virus gets developed and introduced and starts becoming available to a larger mass of the population.
So you mean to say that one should get into these companies and sectors only when the vaccine announcement happens, not before that?
So I would probably say that I think I would break this sector into two parts. One is companies which essentially have a lot of debt, a lot of leverage. I think one should just avoid them. Okay. Uh, and then there are companies which have a lot of cash and have a very unique business model where you probably believe that these companies will surely survive and there is no risk to their business model. And I'll give you an example of a company that we own in our PMS. It's a company called Mahindra Holidays. Okay. Now, Mahindra Holidays has a very unique business model where it already has the customers through the members who have already paid the membership fee and are paying Mahindra Holidays an annual maintenance charge for essentially maintaining the resorts. So if you look at it, Mahindra Holidays has nothing to lose. Even if there is no fresh one walk-in, Mahindra Holidays will continue to be cash flow positive. Okay. And the stock price has fallen from 450 or 500, the peak it was maybe 2-3 years back, to about 150 to 170 rupees it's currently trading at, for a company which honestly has no debt, remains cash flow positive, continues to show accounting profits, and is part of a very pedigreed group. Okay. Now that's a space you can start to look at. In addition to that, it's a business where you really don't need people to travel too much. You can just travel with your family in a car and reach out to basically the closest Mahindra Holidays resort, maybe at a 3 to 4 or 5 hours drive. You don't need to take a flight. You don't need to take a train. You can just drive down there. Now, this kind of a business, if you ask me, I think may not be too dependent on basically the launch of a vaccine. But if you ask me, a normal airline company, a normal five-star business, a normal restaurants business, I think that kind of a business will depend significantly on essentially the launch of a corona vaccine. So I think that is how one has to basically look at the space, and within that look at individual players and how they are placed.
Great, great. I got it. Nilesh, Ramdev ji in one of our session, had said us that there is a method in madness. Now you are a very methodious guy and very, process oriented. What I know about you. In current scenario, would you look at beaten down stocks or beaten down names? And do you have anything in mind or any specific name that you are considering at the moment in current scenario?
So honestly, I'm not so much of the beaten down kind of thing, because I always feel that essentially it is to be basically you need to kind of invest into growth oriented sectors. I think that is really where basically the very high compounders, or what we normally refer to as multi-baggers, is essentially comes from growth. Because we all investors are into equities for growth. We are here for returns. Okay. And the returns in a stock come from the growth of the business. Okay. And typically when there is a growth oriented business, it is not necessarily cheap. It is very rare to see it kind of beaten down, unless of course you have a situation like the month of March where things just kind of fell off a cliff. But otherwise, one should basically still be more focused on essentially companies which are growing and are available at reasonable valuations. Everybody, of course, wants growth at cheap valuations, but that is like you probably have to wait for another 5 or 10 years. It's like waiting for the perfect bride or the perfect match for yourself. You may have to wait for years altogether. As Buffett says, that you can wait all your life for essentially to find the perfect partner. And when you find the perfect partner, that partner may not want to partner with you. So it kind of ends up being like that. So don't necessarily just look out for beaten. But I, in my earlier answer to your question, kind of spoke about Mahindra Holidays, that why I think that essentially is a beaten down stock or a play on a beaten down kind of sector. But otherwise, I prefer to kind of be in very growth oriented sectors where there's a very unique proposition that company has to offer.
Got it. Great. Got it. Now, Nilesh, this is one question, which as a wealth advisor, we get to hear a lot these days. And I'm sure people in media also keep asking you about it. We have seen a lot of money driving valuation of consumption stocks. For example, the valuation in some cases are higher than even pre-pandemic.
Yes.
How should an investor approach this sector or maybe stocks?
Yes. Okay. So the way I look at it, because and that I think is a very interesting kind of a question. There are a set of investors who are relatively risk averse. Okay. And are probably looking out for returns which are better than if you just beat the bank FD rates. Okay. And maybe given the kind of run up in the valuations that you have, you probably go and buy into your stocks like HUL, Britannia, Dabur, Asian Paints. These are the kind of companies which will keep growing at about 8 to 10%. Okay. And depending upon what price you buy them, but you probably will end up making returns over a period of time, which are pretty close to that. Okay. But if you're looking for probably slightly higher returns, then these established bellwether stalwarts may not be the right place to be in. Of course, from a wealth allocation, maybe you still want to have some portion of your portfolio which is there. So instead of a bank FD, I as a wealth manager or a wealth advisor would strongly say, instead of that, why don't you create a portfolio of these 10 stocks, which will probably, if the bank FD is giving you 5%, and if you're okay with an 8% return, hypothetically, a better way to do it is to kind of have it here. The bank FD, of course, keep in mind, you'll have to pay tax at 30%. Here, you will have to pay tax only at 10%. So post-tax advantage of owning a basket of these kind of stocks is much, much higher. So that is one. The next way is to basically stick to the consumer sector. But if you're looking for maybe, say, probably double-digit returns, then look at the next level of companies within the consumer pack. And what we have been doing in our PMS is we've been owning stocks like, say, for example, Zydus Wellness, which makes sugar-free, Nutralite, now Complan, Glucon-D, that kind of company. Now, this is a company which I think will grow at a much higher pace and where valuations are a little more reasonable. Okay. Or you kind of own a company like, say, a TTK Prestige, which is again a consumer company, but basically is into kitchen appliances, where valuations again are reasonable and can grow at a higher pace. Or you have again a growing company like, say, Radico Khaitan, which again we own, which is into alcoholic beverages, is basically really fighting with the Diageos, Pernod Ricards, etc., all of those kind of companies, and probably will grow at a slightly higher pace. So it, of course, entails a slightly higher level of volatility and a high level of risk. But I think probably over a longer period of time, your returns would justify the kind of higher risk that you are taking. So I would probably say that the consumer space still looks attractive, but within that, you probably need to have a dual approach. One approach for the very established mega caps, stalwarts, bellwether stocks, where you probably will have to be content with a high single-digit return. And then you will have, again, the slightly smaller companies in consumer pack, which basically, of course, are good companies. And these are not like tiny companies, but these are well-sized companies. They are leaders, they're business leaders. They have very low debt or no debt, capital efficient, and growing at a fast pace or at a higher pace. And maybe you could, if you are slightly willing to take more volatility, you probably are better off owning these kind of companies.
Got it. So, but what is driving the valuations for them? I mean, is it the easy money which is available, or is it that people are not interested in taking much risk right now?
So I think it is a function of several things. Typically, consumer is basically a defensive play, and consumer tend to do well when rest of the economy is not in the best of shape, when rest of the sectors are finding it difficult to grow. And that is why basically the money, then liquidity, goes into a sector like consumer, because there is high visibility of growth. Number one is, so I would probably say high visibility of growth. Number two is their capital efficiency. The return on equity for some of these consumer businesses are again very, very strong. The third thing is, of course, is basically governance. That when you are buying into these kind of companies, you broadly believe that the governance is intact. There will be no capital misallocation and things of that kind. So I think that is what is driving liquidity to these kind of stocks. I probably think is that once you have other sectors pick up, then basically the fancy for a lot of the consumer oriented sectors will essentially not be there. And then you will see these stocks going sideways. So if you look at the last 3-4 months, for example, when sectors like pharmaceuticals and technology have started to do well, consumer oriented stocks have gone sideways. So I think what has helped the consumer sector so far is the TINA factor, that there is no alternative.
Got
But when there is alternative which is coming up, then basically I think liquidity flows into other sectors.
Right. Nilesh, do you think it is time for investor to start investing in mid-cap stocks in place of frontline companies? Because from June quarter onwards, we can see that larger ones are gaining market share.
Yes, but I think that the valuations of some of the mid and the small cap stocks are a lot more attractive versus basically some of the large companies. And therefore, I think there is an opportunity in the mid and the small cap space. The mid and the small cap space has now been underperforming for a very, very long period of time. Okay. And if I were to kind of look at the last 10 years, the first 5 years was essentially where mid cap, small caps gave you fantastic returns. And maybe the last 5 years, it's the large caps which have given you fantastic returns. So even within the marketplace, there is a lot of rotation going on based on capitalization. And I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 3 to 5 years, mid cap, small cap as a basket might end up doing better than the large caps. But having said that, one will still have to be selective. And I would therefore think that every investor should there should be room for large caps, mid caps, and small caps in his portfolio. Just going one way probably will not help, because if I look at some of the other high growth sectors, like say, for example, I were to look at general insurance. Okay, now we own a stock in our PMS called ICICI Lombard General Insurance. Okay, they're into health insurance, medical insurance, general insurance. Now, there is no other mid cap or small cap in that space. But that space is very exciting. That sector is very exciting. And therefore, you should basically be also very open to large caps also, but on a very selective basis.
Right. Now, Nilesh, it is said that when markets peak, there is a lot of euphoria. This market has done quite a lot. I mean, pretty sharply rather, but there is no euphoria. You talk to anybody, they advise caution. Does it mean that it still has got a long way to go?
Oh, absolutely. Completely. I mean, I would strongly believe that this rally or this up market or a bull market, so to say, I think has many legs yet to kind of go. We have a long way to go. And I think that as long as there is pessimism, as they say, bull markets are always built on a wall of worries. And there are worries right now. Markets have run up. For how long will this liquidity last? Inflation is going to go up. Earnings are not there. Economy is not going to come back. When will reforms happen? When will the remedy for the virus come in? There are so many questions right now. And I think as long as there are questions, okay, I probably believe there is an upside. The day there are no questions, there is probably no upside left. So to that extent, I feel that this rally has more legs. This rally has got a long way to go. Of course, in between, there will be speed breakers, there will be corrections, but I still feel that this rally has got a long way to go. I would essentially just remind that, for example, when our markets made a low at the time of the Lehman crisis, then we saw one leg of the rally. Then in 2013, we saw a correction. And then from 2013, from the lows of there, right up to obviously, of course, prior to demonetization, there was a rally. Demonetization brought in a correction, but then again, we kind of had an up move, and the markets kind of kept roaring till 2018, the mid cap, small cap. And of course, the large caps kept roaring even beyond that. So yes, we remain in a bull market. But in this kind of a bull market, you will see corrections along the way, but these corrections could be very sharp and short-lived. We saw that even in 2020, when the correction happened, it was all over in a month. By end of February and end of March, we saw the Nifty probably correct by 35-40% from 12,500 to 7,500 in a very short span. So that kind of volatility one should be ready for, one should expect, but otherwise, I think we are in a very, very strong bull market. Right.
Now, Nilesh, I think result season is on, and you speak to a lot of managements, and on an endless con call, a lot of management commentary is also taking place. Has it become more optimistic compared to what they were in the month of March on the management side of the companies I'm asking?
Yes, I think so. I clearly believe that the commentary from the managements is, I think, a lot more it exudes a lot more confidence versus the kind of commentary that they gave during the months of April, May, and June. So I think, and that is a function of that basically when they spoke in March, April, May, there was a lockdown. Nobody had any visibility as to when this lockdown will open and how soon we will get back into normalcy. I think now, broadly, a nationwide lockdown is essentially an aberration. Nobody now expects a nationwide lockdown. You will see lockdowns, but they will be local lockdowns. Lockdowns happening at maybe an area level or a city level, or maybe partly at a state level, but you're not going to see this nationwide lockdown. So I think managements have turned a lot more positive versus where they were. But having said that, they still continue to believe that FY21 is a year which should essentially be written off. Do not basically assess us or do not gauge our potential based on what we are going to report in FY21. Look at FY21 as an aberration. This was essentially a year where it was no fault of the company for its sales to kind of fall by 20 or 30%. There was a lockdown. We all had to comply with a lockdown, and there is nothing that we could have done beyond trying to just kind of survive, stay afloat, and ensure that we become relevant for our customers.
Nilesh, do you think this pandemic is going to have long-term effect on our economy, and the style and the way in which businesses are getting this done in this country is going to be changing? And any big beneficiary that you are seeing around you, or any new trends that you are seeing emerging out of it now?
Yeah, so I think this pandemic is essentially in a way, it's done a lot of good, it's done a lot of bad. And I think a lot of whatever the negative side of it has been more of front-ended, in the sense, whatever each one of us have faced in the last 3, 4, 5 months, as individuals, as investors, all of that, I think we've seen the pain. I think going forward, this pandemic essentially has done a few things. One is, I think it has made us more conscious of health and hygiene. And so to that extent, I think that's a big positive. So maybe what the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan could not do earlier on, I think the pandemic has been able to achieve that very soon, number one. Number two is, I think this whole work from home culture, I think this has essentially, in a way, I think is going to reduce a lot of costs and expenses for corporate India. And on the other hand, it is making each one of us more efficient, more productive. So I think to that extent, the productivity of the economy, I think, is going to go up. That I think is second. And the third thing, which I think in the context of India, this pandemic has done, is because if you look at it at the state level governments, I have never seen the state governments now reaching out and trying to do reforms around land reforms, labor reforms, the agriculture related reforms that a farmer can now sell his produce anywhere in the country. Okay. I think without the pandemic, without the lockdown, all these things could not have happened. These are all very structural reforms relating to the agriculture sector, reforms relating to labor, reforms relating to the land acquisition. I think all these kind of reforms would have otherwise not happened. So to that extent, I think this essentially has been a huge positive. So I think that yes, there have been negatives of the pandemic, and we all have taken it in our stride in the last few weeks, few months. But I think it has had positive effect in terms of reforms. It has had positive effects in terms of productivity and efficiency. And I think it has had positive effect in terms of our consciousness about health and hygiene.
I mean, any sector or stock which would be beneficiaries of it, which can investor look into it going ahead?
So I think I still believe that the biggest beneficiaries of all of this essentially are, number one, sectors around technology. Because what has happened is that now companies world over essentially now want to kind of offer their products and services in a more digital way, in a more offline way, in a more work from home, stay from home, learn from home way. And our Indian IT services companies are essentially partnering with these companies, helping these companies to provide technology-led solutions. So to that extent, I expect our technology companies to basically do much better because of this, number one. Number two, our pharma companies. Essentially, this consciousness about health and hygiene is not just about in India, but it's there world over. And I think, in a way, this pandemic has essentially showcased our pharma sector to the rest of the world. So a lot of global pharma companies are partnering with Indian pharma companies to launch some of the drugs and the vaccines relating to the coronavirus. And so I think the pharma sector benefits a lot because of that. Third is some of our consumer companies have been able to now launch products like hand sanitizers, which earlier they did not have in their portfolio. And they're launching hand sanitizers. They're launching immunity boosting products. Okay. A lot of consumers have started now consuming products like, say, honey, chamanprash, and those kind of things, those kind of products. So a lot of those kind of consumer kind of sectors have also benefited from that. And the fourth is essentially directly is basically the Indian manufacturing. World over, companies are now looking at options beyond China, saying is how do we outsource from other destinations. So of course, a lot of Indian companies will benefit. Similarly, sectors like defense, where the government of India has decided to basically now stop import of more than 100 items over the next few years. So sectors like defense will also benefit because of this. It may not be directly related to the pandemic, but these are things which have happened during the course of the pandemic. So I think that there are a variety of businesses across technology, pharmaceuticals, consumer, manufacturing, defense, which have benefited as a fallout of the pandemic.
Right. Nilesh, now I would like to spend some time, knowing your investment philosophy, your investment journey, your successes, failures, what you have learned about it, so that, investors also get a hang of it and they become better and educated about it. Um, I would like to understand from you, how do you identify value traps?
So that I think is honestly, something which typically every investor experiences value traps very early on in his career. Okay, because we all initially kind of get into saying is never overpay, pay, buy only when things are very attractive and all of that. So we typically look out for stocks which are at low P multiple, single digit P multiple, attractive dividend deals, discount to book value, and all of that. So what basically Benjamin Graham used to say, and most investors started reading this book called The Intelligent Investor, and which Benjamin Graham had written. But that, if you honestly ask me, is it was relevant for a period when capital was scarce. When very few people were entitled to capital. And therefore, I think all those things became very relevant. The fixed assets that you own, the book value that you have, the cash sitting in your books, and all of that. Okay. Today, if you honestly ask me, capital itself has become a commodity. Okay. And therefore, I think what is very, very important, therefore, is to basically buy into growth. I think that is the most important. Buy into capital efficient growth, which means that buy into companies which are growing, which are generating cash flows to be able to reinvest into the business and continuously earn higher returns on the capital that they deploy in their business. So I think that the best way to avoid value trap, one is of course is don't necessarily, if something is available at a low P, there might be a damn good reason as to why it is trading at that low P. That a market is trading at 20, 25p multiple, this stock is trading at 5p, 7p. There's got to be a reason why it is trading at 5 to 7p. And I think the biggest source of a value trap are twofold. One is governance, that there is something probably wrong with the governance of a company. There's something wrong with its balance sheet. There is something wrong in terms of what the management is doing. So I think governance is one source of a value trap. And the other source is basically business. It's quite possible that it's trading cheap because the business is going to soon become irrelevant. Okay. And therefore, I think when stocks fall up 70, 80% without a general market correction, and we tend to buy it because it's fallen 70, 80%, there must be a good reason why it is. So if you look at some of these print media stocks, okay, all along in the last 5 to 7 years, they kept looking attractive and attractive because the market is trading at 20, 25p and they were trading at 15p. So they looked cheap. Then they started trading at 10p. They looked even cheaper. Then they started trading at 5p and saying, wow, this has to be a steal, But I think the underlying thing was that newspapers are becoming irrelevant. And if you honestly ask me, one of the biggest value traps I have experienced in my recent years is a print media company where I thought that, this should be good, this should be attractive, etc., etc. And there are no more new newspaper companies which are going to come out. So there were basically the power of survival, winner takes it all of that. But I myself fell into that value trap. So I think why? Because the business was getting irrelevant. And the management was basically allocating money to basically a digital business in which it had no core competence. It was allocating money to a radio business, which again, was not becoming so relevant. And they thought that these were futuristic businesses, and they kept basically putting more and more money out there. But in the process, that money was not earning any return. So I think that there is no simple answer in terms of how do you avoid a value trap. But I think all the reasons for a good investment, if you just basically turn them around, they could essentially be the reasons for your value trap, which means poor governance, poor balance sheet, poor cash flows, wrong capital allocation, business not growing, business becoming irrelevant. All these could essentially pretty much be the source of a value trap.
Correct. You're very well put it out, Nilesh. I can tell you, I mean, your entire investment philosophy you have probably summarized in such a small span of time. I mean, it is commendable, and I agree with you that value traps are something that people have to experience to become better investors.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Share with some of your stock successes and failures, Nilesh, in this long journey of yours.
Yeah, so I think as I mentioned, I think yes. I mean, in terms of the failure, I already talked to you about a kind of a value trap which we basically experienced. So we had essentially kind of bought into HT Media, and obviously, of course, we thought a very well-established pedigreed group running a very successful chain of newspapers. They were the number 2 players on a pan-India basis, excellent in terms of editorial content, and mind you, even today, Mint is my favorite newspaper, so to say, so to that extent, fantastic. I think the radio business was also good. But yes, over a period of time, unfortunately, this business has become less and less relevant. So to that extent, yes, that's one position which we then, of course, had to exit. Of course, the stock price has fallen way more than what we had even exited at. So I think that's a classic example. In terms of successes, I think there have been several across different sectors. So basically, in the technology space, in the last many years, Tata Elxsi has essentially been a hugely successful investment that we made. And I think it ended up being a 5x for us in a span of maybe 2 or 3 years for us. That was the first round that we did it. And we exited it many years back also. And we have recently re-entered Tata Elxsi because, if you look at Tata Elxsi, they have 3 important verticals. The automotive vertical, where they do a lot of business with JLR. Then they have the media and broadcasting business, which means they themselves are not the media and the broadcasting, but they basically are working for companies which are into media and broadcasting. And the third is essentially they're working with companies which are into the medical and healthcare space, where they're helping some of these companies to devise nice medical equipments, where they are providing them technology solutions and design solutions. And these are some of the sectors where they have begun to get very high growth. They are growing even in this environment at double digit in this space. So they are reducing their dependence on the automotive space and are basically building a very fantastic high growth portfolio of customers which are into media, broadcasting, and medical devices. And I think these are very futuristic businesses. And I think probably Tata Elxsi is poised now for its next wave of growth. And therefore, we have essentially now are kind of doing our second round of Tata Elxsi, or second innings. The other company, and I've been a huge admirer of this company, is a company called Symphony, which makes air coolers. And why we liked why we like Symphony is because not because the product or the industry is like very great or very fanciful, but what we thought was that here was a company which was just focused on a single product. And this product being a seasonal product, very cyclical business, dependent on weather gods, dependent upon summers and all of that. So in a way, a lot of other players were not very interested in it. So you don't find a Samsung, LG, Whirlpool, Panasonic, Daikin. They are not there into business. Hitachi, they're not there into air coolers. Why? Because it's a very tough business. It's a simple product, but a very tough business to manage. And Symphony was essentially doing this business in a very successful manner, growing at very high rates, and was available at very attractive valuations when we had first spotted it maybe almost 10 years back. So that essentially, I think, has been a hugely successful kind of investment. The third, of course, is essentially neither consumer, neither technology, but a manufacturing business called 3M India. And why we like 3M India and I think we first spotted it in 2010, was that that we saw now 3M India having an India strategy for its India business. Earlier, 3M India would bring in an expat and he would run the show. And he had essentially not significant insights into the India opportunity. And then they brought in basically an Indian as its CEO. And he said then that we need to kind of research in India, make in India, and sell in India. So even when Make in India was not a theme, this CEO of 3M India basically brought in this theme of Make in India. And that changed 3M India completely. So from having zero manufacturing facilities, zero R&D facilities, and having zero sales offices, he basically set up 2 R&D centers, one in Gurgaon, one in Bangalore. He set up 3 manufacturing facilities, and he set up a network of 16 marketing and sales offices on a pan-India basis. And that laid the foundation for 3M India's growth over the last decade. And I think it's been an excellent investment journey. During this period, 3M India compounded its earnings at double digit, grew its cash flows at even higher than the 20 or 25%. And of course, obviously, this stock essentially created significant wealth for investors. So I think, and that is why I say that look out for leaders in select niches. And these are leaders in select niches who dominate categories, who basically grow in double digits, generate cash flows, and are available at valuations which may not necessarily be cheap, but are reasonable, not necessarily in context of its current earnings, but what these earnings could be over the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. So I think if I look at some of the common traits of all these companies, I think these were companies which were run by managements who were very passionate. They had a very unique business strategy. They were obsessed with growth. They were obsessed with margins. They were obsessed with cash flows. And they wanted to do business in a very ethical manner and ensured that they dominated the space in a manner which was best for their customers and best for their shareholders. I think these are some of the common traits that I have come across in some of the very successful companies and some of the very wealth creating investments.
Absolutely, no doubt about it, Nilesh sir. And I just like to, share a data point with most of the investors who are listening out here is that if you would have invested in Symphony in something like 2003 to 2004, it is more than a 300x story. And Nilesh sir is very humble that, he's not emphasizing on the numbers, but that is the kind of a story that Symphony has turned out to be. And most of our investors are actually beneficiary of Symphony. And I know for the fact the kind of money that people have taken into their bank because of Symphony. So Symphony has been an exceptional story. And I must congratulate you, for picking up something like Symphony. I mean, from nowhere, no brainer, nobody was talking about it. And I was fortunate enough to attend one lecture done by Professor Sanjay Bakshi in IMT, where he had invited the promoter to speak about it. The kind of a passion with which the gentleman works is unbelievable. Is unbelievable.
Yes. I mean, I think that its founder Achal Bakeri, promoter. I think he's in a way a visionary, I would say, and I think the passion with which he runs that business, I think, is very rare to come across. Absolutely. I mean, it's very rare. I have not come across too many of the promoters and managements who run their business in such a capital efficient, asset light, and a passionate manner that which Mr. Achal Bakeri runs his business. So I think yes.
Absolutely. An investment of 3 lakh rupees in 2001, 2002 becoming something like 150 crores is a big, big deal. And hats off to the promoter, who create this kind of value.
Yes.
And hats off to the managers like you, who identify such kind of stocks which create so much value for, respective investors as well, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, we all have many, many heroes in our markets, whether it is Buffett, Munger, or anybody. Who are your heroes in this market?
So I think I would probably put as a combination of Buffett and Peter Lynch. I think my core investment philosophy revolves around Buffett in terms of looking at the long term, having a margin of safety, and look out for businesses which have strong visibility. So that I think is basically the key things of Buffett. I think what I have learned from Peter Lynch is to kind of be agile, keep looking around, be alert, and see how you can essentially own a collection of wonderful businesses. So to that extent, I probably think, and of course, while Buffett doesn't focus too much about beating the street, I think Peter Lynch essentially focuses a lot more around beating the street. And I think over a period of time, it's important to also be ahead of the street, beat your benchmarks. So to that extent, my sense is that it's a combination of both Buffett and Peter Lynch that I have essentially learned the most from, and of whom I have remained a huge admirer all along my investing career.
Correct. Sir, we'll take some of the questions from our investors which has been sent across to us. So I'll just compile them and then try to, address as many as I could with constraint of time from you. Someone has written us that bankruptcies in the US have increased in spite of the support given to a lot of companies. In India, the government hasn't given so much support. Do you think we will see a wave of bankruptcies here too? What impact will that have on banks and NBFCs?
So yes, I think there are going to be bankruptcies because a lot of the businesses may not become relevant, or some of the businesses would take some time to revive. So when we talked about sectors like airlines, hotel, travel, tourism, the very established companies here would essentially survive. But there would be a lot of the small and medium enterprises whose entire business model revolved around being service partners to these leaders in these sectors. Now, if my sense is that if these sectors are going to take another maybe 3 to 4 quarters to basically get back to normalcy, I think a lot of the businesses which are supporting these kind of sectors will probably face an existential risk. They could face a risk of survival, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of companies around these kind of businesses, especially businesses which are part of the support economy, the services economy, could essentially face bankruptcies down the line. And therefore, yes, I think for a lot of banks and NBFCs, this will remain a trouble spot over the next 4 to 6 quarters.
Right. This is a very interesting question which has come, sir. So Mr. Mohta is saying, though the market is not that high, there are some pockets of exuberance, particularly in growth stocks. Some very small segments such as consumer companies, some tech firms, some chemical companies have done well, fueling growth hopes. And suddenly all the buying pressure in the market is shifted to that side. Don't you think that this is leading to some kind of exuberance and one must be very cautious about it now?
So don't look at stock prices from where they were in the March lows. I probably think is that, it's like a glass half full or half empty. So if you look at it from the lows of March, you would probably see that, yes, stock prices have rallied. But if you look at where these stocks were in January or February, pre-COVID, maybe a lot of stocks have not yet crossed those highs. Yes, there are sectors like pharmaceuticals and technology where stock prices have crossed that, but that's for a reason. That basically these are companies which are growing. Look at, say, the performance of some of the pharma companies in the June quarter. This performance has been exemplary. Performance has been fantastic. So to that extent, don't take a very broad-based or a very generic view. I think look for individual companies and see how they basically are poised for growth over the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and see that in relation to that growth, how are their stock prices currently? And if you take that approach, you will still find value in some of these sectors where stock prices have moved up, but my sense is that they still have a long way to go.
So, sir, someone is asking you, which is going to be the new Symphony?
I don't know which is going to be the new Symphony, because when we kind of looked at Symphony, we never thought that Symphony is going to turn out to be the way it will be. We had some degree of understanding or confidence that yes, Symphony had the potential to grow at high rates, but that the market would reward it so handsomely was something which even caught us by surprise. So my sense is that don't necessarily look out for the next Symphony. probably there will not be another symphony. And I think you will have to give credit to each individual company. It's like saying is that there is never next Reliance. Reliance is Reliance. There is never the next HDFC Bank. HDFC Bank is HDFC Bank. So to that extent, my sense is that there's nothing like a next. Look at each individual company on its own merit, and I think invest accordingly. I would still probably think that some of the strong compounding opportunities, some of the strong wealth creation opportunities, I think will still remain in areas like technology, pharmaceuticals, and consumer. I think these are the three sectors which, according to me, still have a very high potential. And I would at this stage still be very content with companies which can grow their earnings, way ahead of the street or way ahead of rest of the market. That's the way I would basically, address this, rather than trying to necessarily find essentially the next multi-bagger. Keep in mind that in your quest to find the next multi-bagger, you might end up being stuck up with a multi-bagger also. So, just be very, very careful of that.
Correct. So last one, which would like to understand from you is, we both are into the part of that industry. What is it that you have of a view as a wealth management business or asset management business, which is listed out here in India now? What kind of a view you, because I know at one point in time you were pretty bullish on HDFC AMC and it was a part of your portfolio as well. So what kind of a view you keep of that sector now?
I am extremely bullish on that. I am very, very bullish on that entire space of wealth management, asset management, mutual funds. And why I'm bullish is because just look at it. We are a country of 130 to 140 crore people. Okay. And there are just 2 crore unique mutual fund investors, just 2 crore unique mutual fund investors. Now, just imagine that even if 10% of India's population becomes an investor in mutual funds, we are talking of 13 to 14 crore people, or maybe over the next 5 years, 15 crore people who could become mutual fund investors. So this number of 2 crores could pretty much go to maybe 13 crores, 15 crores, or 20 crores. It's rare to kind of come across a business which has such a long runway of growth. Number one. Number two, we are almost a $3 trillion economy. Okay. Leave aside, of course, the degrowth the GDP would have and all of that, but we are a $2.5 to $3 trillion GDP. The aggregate AUM of the mutual fund industry is only $300 billion, which means the total aggregate AUM of the mutual fund business is just 10% of the GDP. You forget the country like United States or Japan or whatever it is, but look at countries like Brazil or South Africa. This number is as high as 50 to 60%. Now, if we are a $2.5 trillion economy over the next 10 years, based on essentially basic growth prospects, we become even a $5 trillion economy. And 50% of $5 trillion is $2.5 trillion economy, which means that in the next 10 years, the mutual fund industry, which is currently in size of $300 billion, could become a $2.5 trillion AUM business, which means this business could grow 8 to 10 times for the industry. It's rare to come across that on very base case situation, you can actually in the next 10 years, see the industry go 8 to 10 times. Okay. And within that, you have a company like HDFC AMC, which still we continue to be invested in that. It continues to be one of our top holdings, where it continues to be essentially amongst the leaders. It still has 13 to 15% market share. It's a business where earnings have compounded at about 20% over the last 10 years. It continues to enjoy return on equity of 30 to 35%. And I think the stock price has also corrected from about 3,600 to about 2,300. I think it's a fantastic business to own, given the kind of growth prospects which the industry has. And I would essentially be very, very positive, very optimistic on a business like this. It would be a very, very strong candidate to be able to compound its business and compound its earnings over the next 5 to 10 years.
Great, sir. On that note, I would like to end this session, and it could not end on a better note that, if the industry is going to grow, the investors are bound to make money in the process. Thank you so much for enlightening us on this Saturday afternoon. It's been
Thank you.
absolutely amazing session, and you have covered almost everything that could have been discussed, in this 1 hour period. Thank you so much for being a part of this Perspective 2020 with us, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vikas. Thank you all. Thank you for the entire team.